I'm Peter Marx. I was the chief theater critic of the Washington Post for 20 years, and before that, spent about a decade at the New York Times doing theater reviews and other things. I'm now a struggling actor. The struggle may be more with talent than finances at this moment, but I'm trying to look at the world through a different lens. And we have with us certainly on a topic that really is extraordinarily important. We have with us two really wise men of the theater and arts world. To my left is Robert Marx, who is the president and managing director of the Samuels Foundation. Much of its money goes to arts organizations. And to his left is Tom Finkelpearl, a former former commissioner of cultural affairs for the city of New York. So we have a tremendous amount of experience on the stage. So gentlemen, I wanted to start, when I was 13 years old and living in East Brunswick, New Jersey, I would put $8 in an envelope and mail it to a theater on Broadway and say, I want tickets to the show you have in your theater. And I would get back in the mail 2 tickets to things like Hello, Dolly with Ethel Merman, or Company, the original production. $8. Just as a perspective setter, today, if you wanted to see Othello on Broadway, the average ticket price is $374.17, the average ticket price. If you wanted to take your family to Wicked, the average ticket price is $169, 20 years after it opened. If you wanted to take your partner, your grandmother, and your 17-year-old child, a student, to the Metropolitan Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, it would cost you $99 for just a visit. And frankly, as a birthday present for my upcoming 70th birthday, my wife bought us tickets to the New York City Ballet, and for 2 tickets, she paid $480. I am not proud of that. In fact, I'm almost ashamed to admit that I'm spending that kind of money for something I love. I know it goes to a good cause, but I wonder how many other people are in a position to do that. So my question to you, gentlemen, is what the hell are we doing with the arts? And how can we not expect people who don't have the means to think of this as an elite form that's not for them?
Well, you just jumped in to the core issue between then and now. And you're 70, I'm 75, and I'm of the last generation of native New Yorkers, working class New Yorkers. My parents were Holocaust refugees. My father was a refrigerator repairman. My mother was a bookkeeper. And there were no economic barriers for my generation between working class people and the arts in New York. You needed curiosity more than money. If you could afford to go to a movie, you could go to Broadway, the Metropolitan Opera. It was not $4, it was like $3 when I started out. But it was unbelievably cheap and unbelievably affordable. And the people who were the core audience for much of the performing arts, and Tom is grounded in the visual arts, I'm in the performing arts, the core performing arts audience in New York were people from Brooklyn and the Bronx who got on the subway, came into Manhattan, and the old marketing line used to be that the Times will fill the orchestra, the Daily News fills the balcony. And my message, and I say this all the time, is that somehow as an arts industry, and we're one of the great indigenous industries of New York City, we somehow need to restore the one, maybe the only kind of diversity that we had and got rid of. And it's the economic diversity. The fact that the theaters and the Met Opera could just assume that its upper balconies were filled with immigrants and the immigrants' children and grandchildren for whom this was the music of the old country. And there was a gravitational pull and an affordable pull in all of that. And until we restore economic diversity in the performing arts, at least, we are never going to achieve all of the other issues. And what you're talking about with these horrific prices, which are grounded in in the profit motivation and greed and various businesses and individuals figuring out how much they can maximize profit out of a certain endeavor. It's all short-term gain for long-term loss. And we have already lost an enormous amount in terms of the disengagement of working-class New York from the arts. And the sooner we can somehow, I mean, you can't do this on a nostalgia basis. It just has to be completely on 21st century economic terms and social terms. But it somehow has to be achieved with the knowledge of where we were, how we got to where we are now, and how we have to reclaim in contemporary terms some of what we had.
Tom, yeah, that sounds really right. Tom, you understand this both from a visual arts perspective and a governmental perspective.
Yep.
So
I'm coming from a different, from the visual arts mostly, although when I was commissioner, obviously, we were engaged with the entire art world of New York City. So I think what you're saying is true, but I think that low prices are necessary but not sufficient to regain working class audiences. And the reason I say this is that, there's a lot of free stuff you can do in New York City in the visual arts. It is free to get into the into the Met and natural history, et cetera. But that doesn't mean you have diverse audiences. It's not enough to simply say, we're opening the doors. And so I wanted to I'm writing a book about North American art museums, mostly about the United States, but comparing to Mexico and Canada. And the idea of a high art institution? Do you know where the word high came from? From the word highbrow. Highbrow is a term in phrenology, which is the racist science of skull shape. Says that white people are inherently more intelligent. So the high art institution was already an institution when it was founded in about 100, 120 years ago in New York City. The differentiation between high and low really became a big deal. There was a kind of class exclusion built into the high art establishment. So what happened in museums like the Metropolitan Museum, which, and I want to say that, therefore, the class differentiation is also racist. That's a racist science, phrenology. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City had one black curator for the first 150 years of its existence. That brilliant black curator, Lowry Sims, got to do a Stuart Davis show, which I think is great that a black curator could do a Stuart Davis show. But it meant that there had never been a black artist curated by a black curator at the Met until the last couple of years. The Met has diversified its staff, and I think this is an important thing to say. And they have actually 4 black curators now. They did a Byzantine show. I don't know if anybody saw it. North African Byzantine. Guess what? The Byzantine wasn't just a white project. A black curator at the Met did a show about North African Byzantine. There was the Harlem show, Harlem Renaissance show, got 415,000 visitors. It was a huge hit. And making up for, Harlem on My Mind, the racist show that had been done by...
So you're talking about
right
the welcoming of different audiences?
Yes.
Is that the
so
point?
I'll say one more thing. Yeah. So I have a friend who's in sort of the disability community, low vision guy, was in Vancouver. He said, accessibility is not just a ramp, it's a person. There should be a person that you can call on if you're disabled that's at the museum that can help you with your disability issues. So there's a guy, is Jose Serrano in the audience right here? Oh, no, he's going to speak later today. So Jose Serrano is a guy that worked at the Queens Museum. We had community organizers on our staff. Jose grew up in Corona, Queens, Spanish-speaking, Dominican background. And when he joined our staff, he had left and come back. He was a person that if you spoke Spanish and you were from the neighborhood, that you knew was there, that you could call on, that would open the door and invite you in rather than just opening the door. Because I'm saying opening the door is important, but the door's been open for a long time. Chelsea galleries are free. How diverse is the audience there? It's getting more diverse as the artists are getting more diverse. So I think it's a complicated issue, but it doesn't just, money is part of it, but class and race are also part of it.
Money is a big part of it, I think. And these things tend to go in waves. So that if we go back in time and you look at the really extraordinary legacy of Black and Latino theater in New York City in the 1960s, and also how well it was funded in the 1960s, with the early years of the Negro Ensemble and Repertorio Español and INTAR and Puerto Rican Traveling, I mean, there were so many organizations, and I just, just in terms of creating a safety net for for performing arts producing, the Negro Ensemble Company, which was one of the great theaters of America in those years, was getting annually, on average, the number would change from year to year, but just from the New York State Council on the Arts, was getting about $600,000 adjusted for inflation annually for its operations. That's 3 times what Playwrights Horizons was getting, about the same as Manhattan Theater Club, and about half of what Joseph Papp was getting for the New York Shakespeare Festival, now the Public Theater. And that economic system, and I can really only address it in the performing arts, I can't speak about museums, but that system lasted for about 20 years, basically. And then in the 1980s, it all unraveled. And my field has never recovered from it. And the degree to which there was access and there was identity was made possible in these really remarkable producing organizations that contributed to New York and American culture in a profound way. It was made possible by the availability of money. And then the money went away in a gigantic shock, very similar to what's happening to the nation right now. And we've never recovered from it. And the issues you're addressing on the performing arts side today are largely the legacy of that shock of the withdrawal of the money in the 1980s.
I thought that not-for-profit organizations, I thought as part of their mission was to provide access and to
Yes.
be entryways, gateways. But nonprofit organizations in New York charge virtually the same now as commercial enterprises.
Because it's the American tradition that money ultimately takes over. And when the funding collapsed under, and by the way, this was a sort of bipartisan thing. We had Governor Mario Cuomo in New York as a Democrat undermining the New York State Council on the Arts, and we had Reagan in Washington undermining the National Endowment for the Arts. So there are parallel tracks to this thing. It's a complicated story. But when that happened, you had performing arts organizations that now had buildings, they had payrolls, they had all sorts of obligations. How are we going to pay this money? How are we going to do all this? And we have new expenses. We have information technology, which didn't exist in Joe Papp's day, and the cost of all of that. And the way to sustain the payroll and the buildings and the bricks and mortar and all the rest of it became by, number one, setting up collaborations with the commercial marketplace, because there used to be a firewall in the theater between not-for-profit theater and commercial theater, and if you mixed those two up, you were done for. And now, of course, it's just a complete commonplace arrangement. And we compromised ourselves on the mission and access and cost and all the rest of it, because really it's the legacy of the 1980s. But we have to find, in 21st century terms, a way to reclaim that with a contemporary model.
So, I mean, I think one of the things you're talking about is like the failure of the nonprofit sector to address class, differentiation. So there's a book called The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. Anybody have ever read that? Ruth Gilmore says that when you go to a place like the Frick, that money has been stolen twice. It was stolen from the workers who made Frick rich, and then it was stolen from the public sector by the fact that it's not paying taxes. So if you are a nonprofit, you should have an obligation to give back to the public, because you're taking money from the public. That's how the arts are supported in the United States. There's government funding, which you're talking about, NEA, NEH, State Council. The basic way the arts are funded here is through tax code. Billions and billions of dollars that are not going to pay for public schools and libraries and hospitals are being taken out and then redeemed by elites at the Frick.
And
by the way, I love the Frick. I hope I'm.
That's understood. But in the food chain of this, which Tom is bringing us into, one of the important issues, and it's a generational issue, is that and again, I don't want to look at this from a point of view of nostalgia, but if you look at the different generations and you look at people like Joe Papp at the Public Theater and Ellen Stewart at La Mama, and those were the two twin poles of the New York not-for-profit theater for an awfully long time. And people forget that Ellen, as this unbelievably wonderful, charismatic black woman from Chicago, the moment you took one step outside of the United States, Ellen was the single most important and most famous person in the American theater. She never got the recognition within the United States that she deserved, but everywhere else literally in the world, whether you're talking about Asia or South America or Africa or Europe, Ellen was the living embodiment of American theater. Both of those people came out of dire poverty, not poverty, dire poverty, and found their way up and out through the arts. In Joe's case, it was really through his neighborhood branch library, and then he became a blacklisted stage manager further on and decided he wanted there to be a theater in New York where people could just go in the way he went into his neighborhood branch library. And Ellen, who under terrible circumstances in Chicago, wound up in New York. She made a name for herself in couture, then walked away from couture and decided to found a theater off Broadway that would benefit her foster brother and his friends. And as she once said to me, and she said, you know, I'm not really all that interested in theater. I'm interested in theater people. And it does come down to that. And when Ellen said people, she meant everybody. She meant literally everybody. And those two people, with their sense of, they never forgot where they came from. And it was incredibly important in the building blocks of those two organizations that there was a kind of spiritual connection back to access, back to all audiences, back to working class people. And even if things evolved and changed over the years, which is certainly true of the public theater, the more we can get leadership like that in contemporary terms, the better off we're going to be.
Okay, in 8 minutes and 21 seconds that we have left, how do we turn the we feel like it's headed in the wrong direction. We're not identifying trends that give us hope. How do we right the ship? What are the things to do to at least start incrementally to change attitudes, to change the system? Tom?
Yeah, so I mean, so by the way, Hunter grad. So one of the things that I did when I was commissioner, we started something called CUNY Cultural Corps, which is paid internships for CUNY students at cultural organizations. And thousands of people have gone through that. Any CUNY Cultural Corps here? Getting the right folks to feel that they can go inside those doors and feel welcome and work and get paid to work, not unpaid internships or a formula for elite hiring. So that's the kind of thing. So we need to get people, I think the people who are at the organization, you're talking about Joseph Papp and Ellen, that those folks had an inherent in their bones connection. It's called the public theater for a reason. It's for the public. And it's Shakespeare Festival also, and it's also, Shakespeare's not incompatible with, Shakespeare was for the public also in his day. It doesn't have to be like the compromise of artistic, that whole bullshit. So I think that we have to look at ways, and I think that this is a moment in which we're being challenged from the right to say that this stuff is meaningful for people across the spectrum, not just elites. And I don't disagree with some of the complaints about elitism. You know that I do not agree in any way with the attacks on Harvard, and et cetera. But at Harvard, which is true at Princeton and Yale, et cetera, if you're from the 1%, the number of people from the 1% at those colleges equals the number of people from the bottom 60% of economic wealth of their families. These are elite institutions, and now we have these sort of counter-elites, which are often also people who went through those colleges and didn't like it because they were conservatives. But these colleges have to look themselves in the mirror and say, we are elite institutions, and we have to figure out, as a people, how to invest more in places like this, not Harvard. So people say, this is terrible. Why is it that, you invest $100 million, or what was the gift that went to Yale Drama School to make it free?
Geffen,
$200 million from Geffen, right?
Whatever. Yeah.
Why didn't Geffen give that to Brooklyn College? What, why does it go to the elite? Because he wants to be associated with the elite name of Yale. So we have to figure out how to reorient and make it as cool and fun and great for the private sector, which I think is important as a protection against the public sector, because you don't want everything to be the Kennedy Center. You get every time there's a government change. Anyway, so those are some of the recommendations that are going to be in this book, is try to figure out these public-private partnerships. More public money is good, but not exclusive public money. And then opening the door and inviting people in things like working there.
And I'm, in terms of the way forward, maybe I have a more dire approach to this right now, because I run a foundation. We look at a lot of numbers from a lot of performing arts organizations in New York City. And I'm deeply, deeply worried about what is going to be happening to the not-for-profit arts economy over the next 3 to 5 years. A very good manager in New York said to me, well, wait, what makes you think it's going to take 3 to 5 years? It's going to happen right now. And my point of reference in the way forward is actually the Great Depression. Because prior to 1932, the early years of the Great Depression, there was really no such thing as a not-for-profit arts organization. Even something like the Metropolitan Opera was a commercial business. And a very smart lawyer had a kind of Hail Mary pass for some organizations during the Great Depression and said, you know, there is this hidden corner of the American tax code that's referred to as a 501c3. What if we started to create tax-exempt arts organizations? I mean, the 501c3 is for universities and hospitals. It's not meant for the arts. But what if we tried to, and well, from that seed, after World War II, it starts to take off and it becomes standard operating procedure. And in Washington, Zelda Fitzchandler's Arena Stage begins as a commercial entity, right? It converts, it becomes a not-for-profit. The last big guy to convert is Carnegie Hall, which became the Carnegie Hall Corporation in 1962. And that has been the operating model for the performing arts for basically 75 years. If you push it back to the beginnings, it'll be about 100 years in the early 2030s. I think that's what's going to happen, is that the arts economy is going to fall into a dire situation within the next few years, and some very smart young producers, not going to be somebody of my generation, but some smart young person, is going to look at the remnants of all of this the same way a couple of people did during the Great Depression and say, there's another way we can put these building blocks together. And that young producer is going to figure out how 3 numbers come back into sync in contemporary terms. And the 3 numbers are the cost, number one, the cost to a producer or a producing organization to get the work on stage. The second number that has to go into alignment is the cost to an audience to see the work on stage. And then the third number to come into alignment is the income that artists will derive from having made the work on stage. When those 3 numbers are back in alignment, we can proceed.
That's wonderful, and that's a very good formula. Listen, from my days when I started as a theater critic at the New York Times, the most joy I got was in seeing the work that was in the most rudimentary form, in the most far-off parts of the city, and to see the level of what was going on, and that was, and to be able to, as a critic for the Times, plant a seed. Encourage someone in that situation to grow what their vision. That part of it seems to me ever renewable. We need that part of, we need that vigor from the media, essentially,
Because I keep
to
saying,
help us with the starting points, which don't have to be with $15 and $20 million musicals.
the unanswered questions are not on the creative side. Choreographers and painters and actors, and their imaginations are going to do whatever they do. The unanswered questions are, how do you get them on stage or in a gallery or in a museum, whatever. It's the producing. That's where we don't know where we're going.
So I'm a curator also, and my next show is going to be about, so I graduated from Hunter here in the 80s. There was no money around. And my next show is about 4 artists, Keith Haring, Sen Kwang Chi, David Hammonds, and Daoud Bey, who are all living on no money. These are 2 friends, 2 photographers, 2 visual artists. And what was it like in the 80s? Why could they be so incredible? They were living in a very cheap city, on no money, supporting each other, mutual aid, and to get away from, like you say, the $15 million production. Maybe we have to like pull the plug a bit on money. Maybe that's easier for me to say. I've got Social Security.
Well,
For now.
I want to say that in our 26 minutes, we've solved many problems here. Thank you to these two gentlemen, Tom, Rob, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.